Male brains take longer to develop. Why? Well, because they're bigger, more complex, presumably. And also, does this mean lower heritability regarding IQ? Well, no, actually, in females, the heritability of traits might be just a tiny bit lower on average. And one possible reason for this is because females might have been selected more for what Sarah Hardy refers to as evolved plasticity. So in other words, females are very expensive to produce. And this means that they have to basically do a lot of adaptive bet hedging in terms of not necessarily committing to any one canalization pathway in the course of development. They might need to keep their options open. If I may, when you say they're expensive to produce, is that because it's inherently more case strategy to have females? It is more case selected to have females because they can't have as many offspring as a male can. Yes, that's right. Females are more case selected than males. As a matter of fact, a third of the variance in individual differences in psychometrically measured life history is due to sex differences, compared to an 8% due to race differences. So it's much bigger sex difference in life history than there is any other kind of group difference. In theory, a man can get numerous women pregnant every night. This is the expensive summa hypothesis. So one possibility is if you're being very careful in constructing a phenotype that's not expensive and disposable like a male phenotype is ostensibly supposed to be, then what you might do is you might invest in preloading that organism with some specialized epigenetic machinery which allows them to be much more sensitive in development to the presence of certain environmental cues, which might change and might require the phenotype to be plastic and open-ended in terms of tracking this. So there's a huge debate in evolutionary psychology at the moment about whether the ovulatory shift hypothesis is real or not. This is the replication crisis coming to evolutionary psychology. And the first casualty seems to be the ovulatory shift hypothesis. And this is the idea that female sexual preferences shift at different times of the month, based on whether they are cycling, whether they are on estrus or not, whether they are ovulating or not. And essentially, the argument seems to be the data are very mixed, and there's always pre-registered studies that purport to be able to disprove the effect. But it turns out there's coding errors in one of the big ones of these. And it looks like the whole thing's going to have to be done all over, and all this sort of thing. So insofar as there might be some validity to aspects of these models, like the ovulatory shift model that presupposes that females have more of a role of development and developmental cues in shaping the phenotype than purely hard hereditary cues would. And some evidence of this comes from life history research. One attempt has been made to estimate the heritability of the mini-K, which is like a short-form measure of life history used to estimate how fast someone's pace of life is. And it turns out that women have much lower heritability for the mini-K than men, which could be consistent with this idea that women actually generally have lower trait heritability for many things, personality-wise, than do men. There was a paper which tried to measure plasticity by computing individual level heritability for each participant in the study using a special formula that they developed. And then they were able to correlate the level of the personal heritability with their sensitivity to developmental branchness, i.e. whether they become specialized or not. And we found correlations between those two things. So in other words, people who had higher levels of life history speed not only had a lower personal heritability, they also tended to have more branchness. They tended to be more specialized. And what we interpreted this to mean was that, part of being case-selected is being prepared. This is an evolutionary developmental term, being prepared for high levels of plasticity. This is based on Sarah Hardy's work, who is a very brilliant evolutionary developmental biologist. And her idea of preparedness and plasticity is these dimensions of evolution. We have selection for these epigenetic mechanisms that can cause adaptive calibration to environmental clues.